Assalamu alaikum. We'll begin in 2 minutes, inshallah ta'ala, giving everyone a chance to make it in. Okay, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to begin. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyid al-Mursaleen, Nabiyuna Muhammad, wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een, wa ba'd. Al-Mukhtasar al-Sagheer is a beginner's book in the Shafi'i madhab. And it is very important to understand the Shafi'i madhab by understanding its history. So today, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to start with a brief history of the Shafi'i madhab. The Shafi'i madhab overall went through 8 stages. The first stage was in between 186 Hijri to 204 Hijri. And this is when Imam al-Shafi'i began to write. And he started to write while he was in Mecca. He continued writing while he was in Iraq, where he authored the book known as Al-Hujjah. And then in 199, he moved to Egypt and started rewriting his works. The second stage is dominated by the Egyptian students. The Iraqi students, they do not have that much of an impact in our school. It is all about the students of Egypt. And this is what we call al-madhhab al-jadid. And this ranges from 204 to 270 Hijri. 270 is when the last of Imam al-Shafi'i's Egyptian students pass away. From 270 to 404, this is where we have the madhab traveling the globe. Essentially, the move started because of the Fatimite Empire taking over places in the Middle East, especially in Egypt, which pushed a lot of the Shafi'i scholars to move to the Far East. And this caused a major expansion for the Shafi'iyya. In between the years 404 and 505, we have a development of something called a turuq, which we'll get into the details of that in a few. And that is 2 major tariq, 2 major schools within our school, the Iraqi, and that consisted of mainly those that were in Baghdad, along with some of the Basris and some of the Shami Shafi'i scholars. And then the Khurasani, also known as At-Tariq or Tariqat al-Murawiza, and that was in the Far East. After this stage comes the first tahrir, the first editing of the madhab. And this happens with Imam al-Rafi'i and Imam al-Nawawi, who eventually then become known as al-Shaykhain. This time period starts from 505 to 676. After that stage, then begins an era of review. So this is not like the editing phase. There's not that much emphasis on the earlier works. It's more of seeing, did what Rafi'i and Nawawi do and say actually add up to what is in the earlier works? So it's all of this focus on Rafi'i and Nawawi. This stage starts from 676, the death of Imam al-Nawawi, till 926, the death of Shaykh al-Islam Zakariya al-Ansari. What happens towards the ends of this stage is all of the criticism that went towards the Shaykhain, al-Rafi'i and al-Nawawi, turns out to be not that strong. We got extra verification to the works they did, an expansion on the works that they did, and therefore a complete consensus and agreement that what Rafi'i and Nawawi did was accurate, correct, with a few minor issues here and there, but nothing major. And this is where we see Al-Imam al-Mahalli and Shaykh al-Islam Zakariya al-Ansari settling the madhab into the works of al-Rafi'i and al-Nawawi. From this stage begins a stage of focusing on explaining, getting into the excessive details. We call this the age of the Hawashi. It actually doesn't start with Hawashi. It starts with shuruh, explanations. So you have Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, al-Ramli, al-Khatib, and many, many others working on explaining and getting into excessive details. In Asr al-Hawashi, they realized that the Shafi'i school is divided into two parties, the party of Ibn Hajar al-Haytami and the party of al-Ramli. What about al-Khatib? Al-Khatib never had a mass following like al-Haytami and like al-Ramli, but his works were still continued to be used and benefited from because of its simplicity. What about other scholars such as Makhrama? Makhrama, they almost considered him to be as powerful as Ibn Hajar al-Haytami. Some even went as far as to say that he was stronger than Imam Abdullah Makhrama. But he did not leave us with as much vast works as Ibn Hajar and the Ramli. After the era of the Hawashi that ended in 1335 in particular, so from 1335 till this day, the madhab as a whole has been emphasized in very limited capacities. Teaching, ifta, and some qada, legal system, and jurist, and so on. Now let's get into some more details to all of these to understand how the madhab developed. Let's go back to the first stage. The first stage, we said, it had to do with Imam al-Shafi'i and him beginning to write. He was born in 150 Hijri. His mother moves him to Mecca because his father dies. This was at the early stages of the Abbasid dynasty. What was great about this time is that it was calm. Fitan were minor, not that much trials and tribulations in the ummah. It was a true opportunity to sit back and study. When he was 2, as I said, his mother moved him to Mecca. In Mecca, his mother automatically pushed him to study. And he used to sit with Muslim ibn Khalid al-Zinji, who was white, but Arabs have this habit where they name things the opposite of what a person is. So Zinji means basically the Negro or the black, but he was pale white. He studies with Sufyan ibn Uyayna. At the age of 13, he's sent to Medina. So this is 13 years after he was born, so that's 163. And he stays with Imam Malik till year 179. During this time frame, he did travel a lot. He went out to the Bedouins to learn Arabic, to learn manners and etiquettes. During the time he was living with Imam Malik had all of his expenses covered. When Imam Malik died in 179, Imam Shafi'i had to travel for work. So he worked as an executive or minister for the Abbasid dynasty in Najran. So that's southern Arabia. And he was there from 179 to 184. In this time is when that big issue happened where he was accused of being a Rafidi. He wasn't a Rafidi or anything of that sort. But the Rafidiyya, or the Rawafid, were really aggravated with the Abbasids because the Abbasids promised that they would get a position in the government, and the Abbasids were not planning on living up to that promise. Because the Rawafid, well, let's just be honest, they have mental issues. So they were trying to cause havoc in different areas of the Muslim empire. And in one of those incidences was with the Shafi'i. And causing issues with the Shafi'i makes sense because the Shafi'i is from Ahl-Bayt. So you could label him with whatever you wanted when it comes to tashayyu' because it would make sense to the observer, to the spectator. This caused Shafi'i to run into problems with the government, where he went eventually to Baghdad. And there's a little bit of historical differences on this. Did he go willingly or did he get arrested? Not a big deal. But when he got there and he was questioned by Harun al-Rashid and Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani. Who's Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani? The number 2 student of Imam al-A'zam, Imam Abu Hanifa, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, wa an Imam Malik. So Shafi'i starts almost like an argument or debate with Muhammad ibn al-Hasan. Muhammad ibn al-Hasan he's mesmerized by Shafi'i because Muhammad ibn Hasan is a major faqih. This young man standing in front of him is a major faqih. So this is 184. So it means the Shafi'i is 34. Bear in mind, Muhammad ibn Hasan Shaybani dies 5 years later. So he was already old enough, seeing this young man and being mesmerized by him, he automatically told Harun al-Rashid, no. This is not the case. This man cannot be a Rafidi. And of course, the famous statement of Imam Shafi'i, some have argued about its validity, but in كان حب الآل رفضا فليشهد الثقلان أنني رافضي. It's a verse of poetry. It says, if loving the household of the Prophet ﷺ is rafd, then let everyone know I'm a Rafidi. Obviously, that's not rafd. But the point that he's trying to make is that if loving Ahlul Bayt, the family of the Prophet ﷺ, is a crime, then call me a criminal, because we all love the family of the Prophet ﷺ. Moving forward, Imam Shafi'i stayed in Baghdad from 184 to 186. In it, he was able to calm a lot of the feud. What feud? You see, Imam Shafi'i, when he came to the scene, there was 2 schools running Islamic scholarship. Ahlul Ra', which consisted of the Hanafis in Iraq, and Ahlul Hadith, which consisted of the Malikiyya in Hijaz. Many people in Iraq that focused on the science of Hadith considered themselves part of Ahlul Hadith, which means them being in Iraq, the territory of Ahlul Ra', there was a lot of tension. Imam Shafi'i, this is where he started to analyze usul al-fiqh, put down a foundation of understanding. And this is where you have those famous statements where many of the scholars of Iraq, whether they're from Ahlul Hadith or from Ahlul Ra'i, saying that we were lost until Shafi'i came. We didn't know what we were doing with Hadith until Shafi'i came. Jameel. In 186, he moves back to Mecca. And he stays in Mecca for 9 years. And that's from 186 to 195. And in it, he writes, or he finalizes his book known as Ar-Risala, the letter. And it's known for that because of what's to happen when he rewrites it later on. In the beginning, it didn't have a name for it. And he's debating and he's arguing with the scholars of Hijaz and the scholars of Iraq, Ahlul Hadith and Ahlul Ra'y. And he starts becoming well known as a middle ground opinion in between these two huge bodies of scholarship. In 195, he goes back to Iraq. Why? Because he's in Hijaz. He's in the land of Ahlul Hadith. He needs to continue presenting and matching his work up against Ahlul Ra'y to make sure that he's understanding their point of view correctly and he's addressing their issues correctly. And it's during this phase, 195, when he goes back to Baghdad, where 4 people gather around him and they don't let him go. Abu Thawr al-Kulabi, Abu Ali al-Karabisi, Al-Hasan al-Za'farani, and Ahmad ibn Hanbal. These 4 students, they did not leave his side for that time that he was there in his second visit to Baghdad. And it lasted from 195 to 197. 2 years he was there. He changed those 4 people's point of view on many things. I mean, think about what Ahmad ibn Hanbal said. He said that a Shafi'i is like the sun. He's health to the body. Imam Ahmad himself said, if I don't have a narration, then I move on to Imam Shafi'i's opinion. In 197, Imam Shafi'i moves back to Mecca to visit his family and to spend some time with them. He stays there for approximately a year. Then he decides to go back to Baghdad. Why? Most historians think it's because he was building a foundation there. And these were major scholars already. Those 4 people that we mentioned, Abu Thawr, Karabisi, Za'farani, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, were already scholars there. So if he could continue working with them, he would branch out his students, not only in Hijaz, but also in Iraq. But he was there for a couple of months, and then he leaves all of a sudden. Most historians think that this is because he saw the Mu'tazila gaining a lot of political positions. Funny enough, and oddly enough, there was a lot of Persian support to this idea. And this, a lot of historians believe, this kind of got Imam Shafi'i very worried about the leadership of al-Ma'mun and what that would lead to. But as he was leaving from Iraq, he ran into the Abbasid leader of Egypt, who invited him back, or invited him to Egypt to visit Egypt. Now, Egypt was pretty stable. The majority of people there in Egypt followed Layth ibn Sa'd. But there was a big segment of people that also followed Imam Malik. But the differences between Imam Malik and Imam Layth are very minor. So it was pretty much a Maliki environment. How do we know that Layth's opinions and Malik's opinions were very, very similar? Well, for one, they asked each other questions a lot. and they took each other's opinions a lot. But take, for example, Imam Malik, according to Al-Qasim, saying that you keep your hands to your sides in prayer. Now, aside from what we might think about the validity of this, what did Al-Layth ibn Sa'd say? Al-Layth ibn Sa'd said it was not sunnah to put your hands on your chest. So just from these basic details, these basic premises, we can see that there would be great harmony between Al-Layth ibn Sa'd and Malik's students. Put on top of that, Al-Layth ibn Sa'd's students did not preserve their teacher's ilm, so Imam Malik's students were actually ones taking it over slowly. When Imam Shafi'i got to Egypt, the same students, his classmates that he met in Medina while he was with Imam Malik, met him there in Egypt. He actually stayed with some of them at their homes. Then he started teaching in Masjid Amr ibn al-As. And there, a new group of students gathered around him. Abu Ya'qub al-Buwayti, who died in 232. Harmala ibn Yahya al-Tujibi, who died in 243. Al-Rabi' al-Jizi, from Giza, where the pyramids are, who died in 256. Ismail ibn Yahya al-Muzani, who died in 264. Al-Rabi' al-Muradi, Yunus ibn Abd al-A'la, who died in 264 as well, and then Al-Rabi' al-Muradi, who died in 270. If you remember, I told you, 204 to 270, the death of the last student of the new madhab, the Egyptian madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i. 270, Rabi' al-Muradi. So we call everything, or we say about everything that he stated before entering Egypt, so before 199, we call it the old school. And everything after 199, we call al-Jadid, the new school. But why? Why did he change his opinions on some matters? A lot of people came up with a lot of stories, but the bottom line of it was an accumulation of two things. Exposure to Al-Layth ibn Sa'd's school. Also, he gathered the books of Al-Awza'i and reviewing the adillah that he had prior. Also, in Egypt is where he wrote the letter, Al-Risala, his finalized version and book on Usul al-Fiqh. And he sent it as a letter with Ibn Surayj, not the scholar Ibn Surayj, but Ibn Surayj al-Naqqal. There's another Ibn Surayj who worked, we can call him a mailman, who took that to different scholars such as al-Humaydi and others. After Imam al-Shafi'i's death in 204, automatically his students got to work. Namely, al-Buwayti, who was known as being the Khalifa, the one to pick up all of al-Shafi'i's work and continue it in the masjid and in the different classes. And that was al-Buwayti. And he did so. And he continued to do so for over 20 years, until the fitna of the Quran being created happened. And Imam al-Shafi'i had told him, I saw in a dream, Abu Ati, that you will die with iron or metal around your wrists. And he died in prison. Reading the historical data, I could almost say it was lead poisoning because of how they're describing the discoloration that happened to his skin and in his veins. Wallahu a'lam. So he went and he debated against the idea of the claim that the Quran is created. and he died for that cause. When he left, Al-Muzani, who was nicknamed Nasir al-Madhab, the one who can defend the madhab, he took over the teaching halaqa of Imam al-Shafi'i and Imam al-Buwaiti. And during this time, he writes his famous Mukhtasar. And the Mukhtasar, the summary, was written as an accumulation and a summarization of everything a Shafi'i said. So it could be memorized and studied with ease, and it's in one volume. As for Rabi' al-Muradi, he is the individual that narrates all of Shafi'i's works in Al-Umm, in Al-Risala, in Jama' al-Ilm, in Al-Istihsan, all of the works of Imam al-Shafi'i. Al-Rabi' al-Muradi, we could even argue that he was Imam al-Shafi'i's tape recorder. He lived for a total of 66 years after Imam al-Shafi'i. Students from around the globe came to receive Imam al-Shafi'i's works from Rabi' al-Muradi. People from around the globe came to study with al-Buwaiti and al-Muzani. These three individuals are the foundation that the Shafi'i madhab is built on to this very moment. Buwaiti with his teaching and his Mukhtasar, Al-Muzani with his teaching and his Mukhtasar, and Al-Muradi by preserving all of the works of Shafi'i. So, in conclusion, this stage had a lot of teaching, a lot of authoring. Not only that, ifta, qada, the whole legal and judicial system in Egypt was changing to be completely Shafi'i. Not only that, since their time, those three students, all the way to the time of a Subki, there was a saying that goes, if the Supreme Court system, the leading judge, is not Shafi'i, then whoever's there dies very quickly. Because if you go back into the historical records, you see that the longevity in the judicial system of Egypt, all the way to the time of a Subki, was always given to the Shafi'iyya that were in that position. And think about it. If you think about some famous names, you'll see that they were Shafi'i. Hafidh ibn Hajar, Shafi'i. He was Qadi al-Qudah. In the third stage, as I mentioned earlier, was the spreading of the Shafi'iyya. 270, the death of Rabi' al-Muradi, to 404. And we'll get to why it was 404 in a second. The Shafi'iyya were limited mainly to Egypt. But then we have the Fatimites coming. But historians pause before they mention the Fatimites, and they say, you have to understand something. The world was divided. Either you're with Malik or you're with Abu Hanifa. And there was a lot of tension. And these students from Egypt are breaking things down nicely with ease. Shafi'i himself left so much works. Malik left what? The Muwatta. Abu Hanifa left what? A few books, and there's even questions whether he wrote it or not. But let's look at what Shafi'i wrote. All of fiqh is documented. It's done. Allahu Akbar. So people liked it. Also, the governments in Hijaz were hardcore Maliki. The governments in Iraq were full-blown Hanafi. In Egypt, it was still in the process of becoming Shafi'i. But what this meant was that the Shafi'i madhab almost became like the populace madhab. The madhab of the people, not the government, right? Not the mufti at the Ifta center. No, this is the madhab of the people. And that historians focus on this aspect a lot. Along with his books being preserved, his students teaching a lot of people, there's no political support like the Hanafis and the Malikis have. People liked it. People welcomed it. Now, add on top of that, the Fatimites entering into Egypt. Yes, what happens usually is scholars will flee these areas. But aside from the fleeing aspect, students that started appearing around the globe, like Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Anmati. He studied with al-Muzani, he studied with Rabi' al-Muradi, and then he went back to his hometown, which was Baghdad. And from him, Abu al-Abbas ibn Surayj, the faqih, took from him the madhab. Not only that, Ibn Surayj, he bumped heads with all the other madhab. And he took down the Zahiriyya, especially Muhammad ibn Dawud al-Zahiri. So it's spreading globally. It's tackling other madhahib. It's the madhab of the people. One of the first Egyptian Shafi'i judges in Egypt, as soon as he comes into power, what does he do? This is what he does. He says, whoever comes to me from Hashem memorizing the Mukhtasar of al-Muzani, I will give him 100 dinar. So he's in Egypt. He's a qadi in Egypt, and he's tackling Hashem. What's going to happen in Hashem? Everyone's going to try and memorize Mukhtasar al-Muzani. That's like $10,000, $20,000 today. 100 dinar. Jamil. You have Al-Qafal al-Kabir, who also took from Ibn Surayj, who goes further east to spread the madhab. Not only that, we have a new concept appearing in the Shafi'i madhab, and that is books are being authored to preserve the names of the different Shafi'i scholars. First one was done by Abu Hafs Umar ibn Ali al-Mutawi by the order of his Sheikh Abu Tayyib al-Sa'luqi. So now we're having the history of the Shafi'i madhab being documented along as it's being written, right? So we're preserving all of this information. The final spread of this phase happens, as I said, by the Fatimites, who completely are out of Egypt by 350, 355, 358. They're out of Egypt, and they're in Iraq, and they're in Khurasan. Now, these gatherings, these schools of the Shafi'iyya in these places causes this development of schools, causes there to appear two different systems of analyzing information. Now, these schools were being funded by the governments in these areas. So you have Al-Qadir Billah, he was Shafi'i. You have Nizam al-Mulk, was Shafi'i. And he's going around in Baghdad, in Naysabur, in Khurasan, building Shafi'i Fiqh schools. Now, these are gathering points for scholars. What happens in Iraq is that we get people like Al-Imam Abu Hamid, Sheikh Abu Hamid al-Isfrayini, who writes a huge sharh on Mukhtasar al-Muzani. We have his student, Al-Qadi Abu Tayyib al-Tabari, who died 450. He's a student of Sheikh Abu Hamid al-Isfrayini, who also writes a large explanation on Mukhtasar al-Muzani. We have Abu al-Hasan al-Mawardi, who also takes from Sheikh Abu Hamid al-Isfaraini, and also takes from Sheikh al-Saymari from al-Basra, from the schools that are in al-Basra. And what you're getting here is a presentation of the Shafi'i madhab with its own style. Because when we go and look further east in Khurasan, we see a Sheikh Abu Bakr Abdullah al-Marwazi, who died 417, who is considered the Sheikh of the Khurasanis. He's developing things a little bit different. And we take notice of it in his two top students, Abu Muhammad al-Juwayni and al-Qadi Hussein. Abu Muhammad al-Juwayni is Imam al-Haramain's father. Al-Qadi Hussein is the teacher of al-Baghawi. From these three, we see people like Abu Ali al-Sinji, al-Mutawalli, Ibn al-Sabbagh, Imam al-Haramain. And from the Iraqis, we also see Abu Ishaq al-Shirazi, al-Ruwayani, and others. But you'll notice something, a major difference. Let me give you an example. If we go to Imam al-Haramain's works, how big are they? They're enormous. Even when his student al-Ghazali tried to break them down, they turned out to be enormous. But when we go to Abu Ishaq al-Shirazi's works, which is technically the same chapters, they're tiny. So Imam al-Haramain's work is like in 20 volumes, while Imam al-Shirazi's works is more like in 3 or 4 or 5 in some editions. It's the same chapters. For the most part, 75% are the same masail, same issues, same scenarios, same discussions. So what's happening here? We realize there's two different styles of breaking down all of the details of fiqh. The Khurasanis, the Far East, also known as al-Marawiza, they're focusing on the excessive details. Well, if this is the scenario, from this scenario, we can branch off 2, 3, 4, 5 scenarios. The Iraqis were like, this is the scenario. Now, here's the next scenario. Here's this other scenario. Here's the next chapter. They didn't do that. So we find in the Khurasanis excessive details. It's so excessive to the point that, do we consider some of these excessive details as legitimate opinions in the school, or don't we? Imam al-Nawawi, he did. Ibn al-Rif'ah, who came after Imam al-Nawawi, said, no, they're not. But those that came after Ibn al-Rif'ah said, Ibn al-Rif'ah, your opinions are so detailed that we have to consider them as independent opinions within the school as well. So I don't know why you're arguing about Imam al-Haramain al-Ghazali. We have the same problem with you. And we'll get into what that means in a moment. Now, towards the end of this phase, towards 505, we realize that they realized that there were differences of opinion. There were different styles. So you actually come to the realization that Al-Ghazali, Abu Ali Sinji, they're realizing that there's two methods present in the Shafi'i madhab. In the beginning, they didn't realize that that was happening. But towards the end, they picked up on that fact. And since they picked up on that fact, a change started to occur in everyone's writing, especially with people like Abu Ali Sinji, Al-Mutawalli, Al-Ghazali, and a little bit Ibn al-Sabbagh. And to a certain extent, even Imam al-Haramain, but not as those that came after him. What was that change? They started to try and unite between both sides. So write a fiqh book that consists of these different opinions all together. This led us to break down how we view opinions in the school. So this is what we said. If we have it in written form in Imam al-Shafi'i's books, we called it a nas. A nas. A text from al-Shafi'i himself. But if it's transmitted from al-Shafi'i, not written in any works, we usually call it a qawl. Okay. What else? Everything from 270 to 404, any opinions, new opinions that Shafi'i didn't say, we're going to call it a wajh. Everything from 404 to 505, we're going to call it a tariq. But you'll notice I didn't say anything about 204 to 270 because the focus was transmitting what Shafi'i said, not what they said. Now, sometimes Al-Muzani, Al-Buwaiti might have their own opinions and all, but it doesn't really impact us in the madhab as a whole. So we have a nas and qawl, things that Imam Shafi'i wrote or said. We have a wajh for the students of the students, all the way until they broke apart into two independent branches. And then after 505, those branches came back together. How did they come back together? It formally took place, and it happened with al-Rafi'i. But before we get into that next stage, let's just point some things. When we say Iraqi, we say Khurasani, it doesn't mean that they're from Iraq. It doesn't mean they're from Khurasan. It just means that was the gathering point. As I mentioned, the Khurasanis and the Iraqis existed at the same time. They didn't realize that they existed, but they were present in their own respective territories. Al-Imam al-Nawawi tells us we find the Iraqis are more focused on what Shafi'i said and the basic principles of his madhab, and they more accurately transmit what Shafi'i said and define it correctly. But the Khurasanis are better at breaking the scenarios down and organizing all of the scenarios and presenting them correctly. Hence, you see the works of the Iraqis are smaller while the works of the Khurasanis are larger. Okay? And that explains it. Now, after 505 comes the next stage. In this next stage, it's important to understand why it came to be. By the time al-Rafi'i comes to the scene, the Ayyubi dynasty is present. The Ayyubi dynasty started from 567 to 648. Prior to 567, they were in their beginning phases. During those beginning phases, there was an excessive need for a curriculum. But when the Shafi'i Fuqaha were asked for a curriculum, we had a problem. Do we go with 20-something volumes of Imam al-Haramain or the 3 volumes of al-Shirazi? Do we focus on the Khurasanis or the Iraqis? It was looking a little embarrassing. So what do we have to do? We have to redo the madhab correctly, gather all of these differences of opinions collectively, and work our way that way. All right, mumtaz. This is what al-Rafi'i did. Al-Rafi'i took a famous book, Imam al-Ghazali's Al-Wajiz, and he did this extensive sharh on it. Now it's major, it's big, but it has everything said and done. The very weak opinions are either they're clearly stated that they're very weak, or they're completely annihilated and removed. Because the Shafi'iyya viewed that a very weak opinion shouldn't even be mentioned. Now some still hung around, like eggs being najis, or needing, if you had a liter of filth that spilled everywhere, then you'd need 7 liters of water to remove it. These weak opinions, they kind of hung around a little bit. They're interesting. They're good for teaching students to back away from very odd opinions. But overall, they did try to remove a lot of these whack opinions out there. There's quite a few. So because of this true editing that's taking place, cleaning up any odd, crazy opinions, this brought the Shafi'i madhab back to its pre the tariqatin glory. not that the tariqatin brought that glory down, it's just that it's like, think about it as if the scientists are in the lab working. Now we can bring our discoveries out. Okay, so now the Fatimites are gone because the Ayyubi dynasty, Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi and his dynasty, removed them, cleared them out. A lot of the Mongols were taking over Asia. The Shafi'i madhab was starting to die out in the Far East. Egypt opened up again. Everyone moved back to Egypt. Now in Egypt, schools were open for the Shafi'iyya. Rafi'i's books were welcomed. Everyone started focusing on Rafi'i's works. But there was a few issues with the Rafi'i's works. Number one, you see how I mentioned a moment ago, Nas, Qawl, Wajh, and Tariq? Imam Rafi' didn't really stick to a certain system because it wasn't really set as a standard in the school just yet. This caused a lot of confusion, especially when you're not saying who said what, you're just saying there's a wedge, and you dig behind it and it turns out that it was never a wedge in the first place. It was actually a qawl by Shafi'i. This is confusing. You're gonna need a little bit of work, and this is what Nawawi did. And that's why if you look at, if we open up Imam Nawawi's works, you'll see right there in the introduction, what is he focusing on? The terminology sequence. We're going to stick to this method. We're going to present the fiqh in this way. We're going to clear up confusion. Those two together were the A-team of the Shafi'i madhab. Because Rafi' already did the hard labor. In Nawawi is reorganizing it, presenting it to us in a way that we can memorize, learn, and benefit from. Allahu Akbar, Mumtaz. In Nawawi did so well that the Shafi'iyya overall kind of pushed the Rafi'i's works aside, because realistically, there's a lot of segments of Imam al-Rafi'i's work where you actually need Imam al-Nawawi's work to guide you through it. Not that it's bad. No, it has everything you need. It really does. But you're going to get lost because there's no set terminology. So you're stuck to have to go back and investigate behind this person and behind this term and that term to figure out exactly who said what, when, and where. But I know we solved that. He took, Imam Rafi made a small Mukhtasar to be memorized, al-Muharrar. He readjusted it. Imam Rafi did a Sharh al-Kabir on al-Wajiz. Huge explanation. Vast, beautiful work. It's a masterpiece. I love reading in a Sharh al-Kabir. But you kind of need a sidekick to help you pinpoint who said what, when, and where. This is where Rawdat al-Talibin comes in. Rawda is beautiful. There's a problem with the Rawda too. What is it? He doesn't mention who said what, when, and where. He'll just use the terminologies to let you know it's a wajh or a qawl or a tariq. So for me, when I'm studying, I'm going to need both books together, because maybe a Rafi mentioned the name, instead of me having to go through 500, 600 years of history, I could just see if a Rafi pointed out the name, and I could say, Jazakumullah khair, right? So together, it's what makes them very powerful. Together, they reorganize the school in a way like never before. And no, he didn't just focus on terminology. He investigated, he edited, he corrected, he authenticated, he finalized opinions. After that phase, we saw the scholars focusing on both the Rafi' and Nawawi. Did they get it right? Some went too far. You have one scholar, for example, said, I don't understand why Nawawi and Rafi' keep on using the term thuyuba. It's tayyib. Thuyuba is not Arabic. It's like, okay, seriously, we're really going to criticize them on, ilm al-sarf? I mean, it's basically what you're arguing about. But okay, we can solve this argument. Did anyone before Rafi' Nawawi use the term thuyuba instead of tayyib? Yes. Who? Al-Qadi Iyad uses thuyuba like in all of his books. So technically criticizing Rafi' Nawawi is not going to work on this mas'ala. Some masail they got right. Some masail, it's more of like a point of view. Maybe you're looking at it this way, but it's that way. So you have these people like Al-Adra'i, like Ibn Rif'a, like Subki, like Al-Isnawi, analyzing, reanalyzing, investigating, double-checking, going and looking for the books of the earlier scholars to see if Rafi' actually quoted the information correctly. It turned out by the end of it, so when you get to the phase of like Al-Zarkashi, Al-Birmawi, Al-Mahalli, that's the end of that phase of An-Nudar, that sixth phase, realize, yeah, I mean, Nawawi and the Rafi' were on point. Sure, there's a couple little minor issues here and there, but they're on point. We're good to go. We'll just point out those little issues and it's not even worth it. All of al-Minhaj has 50 issues. Really, a big segment of those 50 issues, both ways go. They're both correct. Karam Jamil. And we'll understand what that means in a moment. So what Nawawi and Rafi'i did, it gave the madhab extreme strength. And then all of the scholars, they latched onto Minhaj al-Talibin. Why Minhaj al-Talibin? Why not Rawda? Rawda is bigger. Because Minhaj al-Talibin is so well organized. You see, Al-Rafi'i, he wrote Al-Muharrar after he wrote all of his larger works. So when he writes Al-Muharrar, it's not based on any book. Some people say, oh, it's based on Al-Wajiz or it's based on Al-Khulasa. It's not. This is Al-Rafi'i summarizing all that he knows, but he's emphasizing on the issues that we need from day to day. Al-Minhaj comes and he does his whole reorganization, review, investigation, authentication to the text. It's what you need. 9 times out of 10, an issue that you go through, it's in Minhaj. Your issue is just locating it. That's it. That's your only problem. But it's there. I've documented over 1,500 works been done on Minhaj up to the last century. So that does not include this century that we're in. Think about that for a minute. Yani, one time I was with some mashayikh and I said, I don't think there's a book in human history that has that much effort been given to, like Minhaj al-Talibin. There hasn't. So one sheikh said, not even the Torah or the Bible. I said, not even the Veda. So one sheikh said, technically not even the Quran itself. I'm like, all right, no, that's a little bit disrespectful. I don't want to go there. But it is actually true. But why? How come there's so much focus? Because the book covers everything you need in your lifetime for the most part. A few masail you'll need to look elsewhere. But behold, because the next stage focused on those little things that you need here and there. And that's called the Hawashi. And these are commentaries on those books explaining Minhaj al-Talibin. Okay, there's basically over 1,000 sharh, explanations on Minhaj. The rest are all commentaries. The way our books work, there's a book, and then there's a sharh on that book, an explanation. And then after that explanation comes a commentary, we call hashiyah. Then after the hashiyah comes a taqreer, an analyzed study of what was said. After the taqreer comes nukat, meaning brief, random commentaries on different points. After the nukat, then it could be anything you want. You know, you could add footnotes, endnotes, just the meaning of some words, etc. But the effort on it is enormous. Right before the age of Hawashi begins, Hawashi actually started, and it was odd how it began. Ibn Hajar al-Khatib and Ramli the son are top students at Shaykh al-Islam Zakariya al-Ansari. A feud happens between Ibn Hajar and other students there in Cairo. Ibn Hajar moves to Arabia. Ramli stays in Egypt. Shaykh al-Islam and Ramli the father and al-Mahalli pass on. Who were the big time students? Al-Haytami and the Ramli. They write these enormous explanations on Minhaj, covering any extra detail that you might need. And then Ar-Ramli sits in an Azhar teaching the book to classes, according to the historical documents, are over 300 to 400 fuqaha sitting in each class. So he's developing oral hawashi, oral commentaries on his own sharh, and it's being reviewed and observed by 400 faqih of the Shafi'iyya at that time. Ibn Hajar, he writes his own commentary on his own sharh. And this is one of the strangest things ever. Usually a commentary is written by the student and it's written on the explanation. Ibn Hajar wrote hawashi on almost all of his own books. And a good news moment, we just found 3 copies of the original manuscript of Ibn Hajar's Hashiyah on al-Tuhfa. It's being transported right now from Baghdad to Oman. And there's a team there getting ready to work on that, transcribe it, and print it, inshallah ta'ala, so it can be available for everyone. Imagine you have a big explanation, 10 volumes, with the author himself saying, oh, if you're wondering what I meant about this word, this is what I meant. Oh, if you're wondering what I actually meant here, this is what I meant. That's gold. That's gold. Stop buying a tuhfa, wait until that hashiyah comes out, because it will solve a lot of misconceptions and arguments and discussions. By the death of these two, hawashi start flooding in, where you have their students and their students' students and their student and the students of the students of the students all writing commentaries. And this goes on from 1004 to 1335. 90% of these hawashi are written on the explanations of Minhaj. Mainly, the focus is on Ibn Hajar and al-Haytami, but also Shaykh al-Islam Zakariya al-Ansari, the teacher of those two scholars, he re-summarized Minhaj by removing khilaf and editing those around 50 spots that I said were points of contention and issue, right? So he edited those 50 spots, he rewrote it, he removed the awjuh, the wajh the statements said by scholars between 270 and 404. He removed the turuq. He removed where in Nawawi said it's a nas or a qawl by Shafi'i himself. He removed all of that to make it easier for people to memorize. And just the mu'tamad, just the standard agreed upon opinion of the school. That got its own flood of hawashi because Shaykh al-Islam Zakir al-Ansari, he explained his own summary and he called it Fath al-Wahhab بشرح منهج الطلاب. On his sharh, on his explanation on Manhaj al-Tullab was a flood of hawashi, of these commentaries. So you see that focus is all on minhaj and things that branched off from minhaj. Now, as the days get closer to us, the hawashi change a little bit. They go from being only about fiqh to being about fiqh, logic, language, structure. And then the hawashi, they change a little bit more. And it becomes, they're not commentaries that a sheikh is writing, but actually they are commentaries that the sheikh is stating during class. Take, for example, the hashiyah of the great Imam and Qari of the Quran, Sultan al-Mazzahi. He never wrote these commentaries. They're actually written by his students, okay, that attended his class. He used to say, come to my class every day, every single day at Azhar for 9 months, and you'll be a fiqh scholar, a Shafi'i fiqh scholar. Yeah, because he finished the book and he started it, finished it, and restarted it, and he kept on going at it after every single prayer. He prayed Isha, he went home, he walked back to the masjid, which was about a 6-mile walk every day, back 6 mile going, 6 mile coming, sit at the masjid, he'll go pray Fajr, sit down and start teaching Manhaj al-Tullab, non-stop, all day long. He finishes the book, he starts it again. Finishes the book, starts it again. And he was Sheikh al-Qurra in Egypt. I don't know when he had time to do that too. But subhanAllah, our scholars throughout Islamic history had amazing blessing when it came to time. In the last phase of the Shafi'i school, we notice a little bit of a downfall. The downfall initially began with the Ottoman Empire. Not that the Ottoman Empire was against the Shafi'i madhab, but the Ottomans were Hanafi. So the use of the Shafi'i school in the legal system became very limited to very small areas in Hijaz, Yemen, Egypt, and a couple other areas. That was pretty much it. So taking the madhab out of the day-to-day legal system had its effect without a doubt. But the Ottomans did keep awqaf al-Shafi'iyya. Sadly, those were destroyed and ruined. A waqf is an endowment. And the way that a lot of people made money throughout Islamic history is by waqf. You do a waqf, an endowment, like you'll build a school and say this school is waqf to the Shafi'iyya. So whatever money comes in, that is distributed to the Shafi'iyya, the teachers, the students, the employees. When the modern governments came in at the end of the Ottoman Empire, what did they do? They said, oh, this building is an endowment? Okay, yeah, it belongs to the government now. You guys can get lost. So all of the effort that the Ottomans did leave for the Shafi'iyya was gone. Why? Because the modern governments took back the waqf, even though in Islamic law, taking the waqf is forbidden. That's haram. But that's what happened. So what happened is once the Ottoman Empire was dismantled and nationalism became the fun thing that people were excited about, everything went back to individual support, activity, and effort. And we became more focused on ibadat only, focused on teaching in small groups, small societies, small communities. You have the idea that everybody and their brother is a mujtahid that popped out of nowhere, which is nonsense. Of course, that had an effect on all four schools. You had official schools, where you go for a certain amount of years and get a degree. People didn't need to go study the Shafi'i madhab because your career, your livelihood wasn't stuck on that. That's why Imam al-Ghazali wrote Ihya Ulum al-Din. Your livelihood depended on you being part of one of the four schools. So you can be a jurist or a faqih or a mufti or a qadi. So people were treating it more as a job than as religion. And that's why he wrote Ihya Ulum al-Din, reviving the sciences of Islam, to try and separate that too. But in our later time, what happened was they got separated in a very negative way, where Shafi'iyya now are like, Egypt is supposedly Shafi'i, half of Yemen is supposedly Shafi'i with a segment of actually true Shafi'iyya, same thing in Egypt, a really tiny segment that are really Shafi'iyya. The Shafi'iyya in Hijaz mostly fled to Ihsa. The Shafi'iyya in Sham are still neck and neck with our fellow brothers of the Hanafi school. May Allah preserve them all. The Hanbalis, well, they have their own issues. Let's not get into that. And the Malikiyya are in Morocco, limited to there, somewhat in Algeria and Tunis. And again, the day-to-day life is still, in all of these places, is a battle between secularism, common wants and populist wants and desires, versus the madhab, which is basically just fiqh, and we're trying to tell people what to do, and that contention lives on to this very day. So this downfall, how can it be corrected? How can it be fixed? Well, our job as students of knowledge is to preserve Islamic studies, being fiqh, tafsir, hadith, aqidah, kalam, lugha, mantiq, all of Islamic sciences. A lot of people say today, oh, but we don't need this and we don't need that because we no longer use it. No longer using it does not mean we will not use it in the future. Think about this and ponder upon this tonight until our next class. Imam al-Haramain, he wrote Al-Ghayathi, was supposed to be an emergency planning for when the Khilafah collapsed. People laughed. People said, what are you talking about? You're just trying to be funny now. Are you just trying to get known? So you're writing crazy things? People were really like, what is this guy talking about? Follow the Khilafah. How? Well, guess what? It fell. It's gone. No one ever thought it. They thought that Imam al-Haramain was writing in something so hypothetical that he shouldn't even be writing about it. But it happened. So then the question now becomes, what do we do now? Well, we do exactly what Imam al-Haramain would have done. The return of the Khilafah. So we should be, and we ought to be, preserving the science and preparing to implement it once it comes back. And don't forget, the Khilafah does come back according to Ahadith. And it was going to go away exactly like Imam al-Haramain said, because it's in the Ahadith, right? And it's going to come back. Khilafatun ala minhaj al-nubuwwah. Again, right? Then we ought to be prepared to fulfill our duties and responsibilities. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us, to keep us firm upon the ilm, and to keep the ilm sacred in our hearts for ourselves, for our children, and for the generations to come. Any questions you might have, please keep them for the Telegram group, inshallah ta'ala. I'll respond in written and audio. وإياكم، ونسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى التوفيق والسداد. وأقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله تعالى لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.